Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our new episode, Political Economy of Forbes 15. My name is Niklas Hintermeier. I'm a journalist of the German-speaking issue of Forbes, and I'm very pleased to have my guest here today. It's Kristina Lunz. She's a Forbes 30 under 30 listmaker, and she's co-founder of the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. It's based in London and in Berlin. Thank you very much for your time, Kristina.
Thank you for having me.
Let's start with the first question, and also for our viewers, of course. Can you give us your definition of feminist foreign policy? What does it mean for you and also like for your center?
Of course, my pleasure. Yes, you said correctly. I'm co-leading the Center for Feminist Foreign Policy. That is a research and advocacy organization that promotes a feminist approach to foreign and security policy. And a feminist approach to foreign and security policy, so feminist foreign policy to us, that means that in a first step, we recognize and we acknowledge the research statistics that show that worldwide there's like high levels of inequality in all countries. Gender inequality is just one of them. And then in a second step, we demand that all foreign and security policy tools, all diplomatic tools, are used in a way that those inequalities are mitigated. Because we know through research that the most significant factor towards whether a country is peaceful within its own borders or towards other countries is the level of gender equality, of equality. So when governments around the world, like the German government, the German Foreign Office, when they stipulate one of their core goals in their foreign policies to be the contribution to sustainable peace and fostering peace, it is clear to us that this can only happen if we put a feminist analysis behind their foreign policy work. Otherwise, there won't be a sustainable peace without feminism.
Can you outline like initiatives that you're currently working on, like projects? I think you mentioned before, like a policy brief for the German Foreign Office, for example. What does it contain, this policy?
And what does it, and what does it like precisely mean, right? Because that was such an abstract definition. So in our attempt to kind of smash patriarchy within foreign policy, we're coming from a point where we know that the way that foreign policy has been taught at university and the way that's been practiced is kind of this realpolitik understanding. So that means that for decades the mainstream assumption has been that the international sphere is this is anarchy, and all states want to get more power, and they get more power and more influence through military might. So that is the predominant narrative in international politics. And we come in and we say, listen guys, that's not how it should be. And especially like we should not prioritize military might and state security over human security. Like human security that includes economic security and healthcare and affordable housing and education and so forth. That needs to be the priority of all foreign policies out there. So to achieve this human security aspect and human rights for all and the dismantling of inequalities, we're trying to see at the center what kind of projects, what can we do to contribute to that. So for example, you just mentioned a policy brief. Like yesterday, we submitted a policy brief that has been funded by the Foreign Office here in Berlin on the question, and it deals with the question, what would a feminist foreign policy response to COVID-19 look like? So for this work, we spoke to those countries that have a feminist foreign policy, and that is Sweden and Canada, France and Mexico. So we talked to them and said, so you guys, like this crisis, like the pandemic is a huge feminist issue. What are you doing to have this feminist lens in your response in mind? So we collected this, and then based on that, but beyond that, based on our own understanding and that of other organizations, we did this brief in collaboration with the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. We produced several recommendations of what we believe the Foreign Office should be doing. So to give you like a couple of ideas, focusing on this policy brief and Feminist Foreign Policy Response to COVID-19, the pandemic is a feminist issue because of several things. First of all, gender-based violence, male violence against women, has been increasing massively. The UN Secretary General Guterres, for example, even called for a ceasefire because of this surge in violence against women. Second, we have gender-blind policies and decision-making everywhere where we look. Like the main, here in Germany, the main, like the talk shows, they're dominated by men, again explaining the world, like by male medical experts, but in international, there's like beautiful research by Global Health 50/50 showing that the main international organizations focusing on global health, they're dominated by white Western men. Third, we have this gendered division of labor. Most 70% of people in the medical workforce, they are women. They're mainly underpaid, and then also unpaid care work increases because of the lockdowns and the children at home. That is usually absorbed, as statistics show in Germany, for example, the Böckler Foundation, that this is mainly absorbed by women. Fourth, looking at the crisis settings out there and international humanitarian assistance and long-term development, we can see that even within those already extremely vulnerable situations, there's again this intersection of vulnerabilities, and again some people are hit hardest again, and they need special protection. 5, why it's a feminist issue, this pandemic, it's because of sexual and reproductive health and rights, they are being compromised all over the world. So we see governments like the US, for example, last week, in a letter to UN Secretary General Guterres and the director of the World Health Organization, urging the UN Secretary General to eliminate language from the humanitarian response by the UN, language that deals with sexual and reproductive health and rights, including abortion. And in countries around the world, access to abortion and maternal care and contraceptives and so forth has been compromised. 6th, and that is a very important feminist consideration from a security perspective, if we look at what states, how they use their money to keep people secure, apparently, we see this, what we believe, very distorted approach. We see that over decades, millions, trillions have been spent on nuclear armament, on the weapon industry, on the military industrial complex, but money is lacking for protective gear now in this pandemic. So feminists in international relations forever, they have asked to move the money from military spending to what keeps people really secure, human security. And number 7, why this crisis is a feminist issue, is because of power grabs by authoritarian leaders. So this crisis has been used by populist authoritarian leaders to get even a stronger hold on their power. And it's especially those leaders that in a first step usually limit the rights of political minorities and marginalized groups, of which women is one of them. So to give a brief overview, but we're also doing other projects, like we're working with Greenpeace on the arms trade treaty, looking at German arms exports and their impact on gender-based violence abroad. Or we are doing an analysis on the international pushback on human rights and what can be done about that. So that's like a couple of ideas.
Perfect. Because you mentioned like Sweden, Mexico, Canada, and France, countries that have implemented like a feminist foreign policy approach. Could you outline like some results or some successes since they have implemented these feminist foreign policies?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So in this brief that we just finished, there's like a huge list, not huge, like a long list of examples what those countries have done during this crisis, but like speaking a bit more broadly, what they've done since implementing their feminist foreign policy. And just a side note, like those countries have implemented a feminist approach to their foreign security policy to like a different extent. Sweden has the most comprehensive approach. France until this point is mainly focusing on their development policy. And Mexico, that launched their feminist foreign policy just in January this year, they have so far presented in theory, again, a very comprehensive approach. So it varies greatly. So what we can see, Sweden, for example, Sweden announced a feminist foreign policy in 2014. Since then, Sweden was as a non-permanent member on the UN, United Nations Security Council from 2017 to 2018, and they, for example, used this space a lot for their feminist work. Like, they invited, more than any country before, more feminist civil society organizations as briefers to the Security Council. They set up a mediation network for female mediators, because worldwide the inclusion of women and other marginalized groups in peace processes is incredibly low, which results then in a increased likelihood that peace processes and peace is sustainable. And that is not because women are more peaceful, but because a peace process, like such a important point in time of like societal transformation, can only be successful if you include all lived experiences in a country and if you consider all needs that are important to people. So that is, for example, what Sweden has been doing. And Sweden has also, and that's been like of a critical issue, Sweden has been pushing for disarmament a lot. And in fact, a lot with the German government, the German foreign ministry here as well, like the former Swedish foreign minister who implemented the feminist foreign policy, Margot Wallström, initiated the so-called Stockholm Initiative. That is a disarmament initiative, and Germany is a very prominent and supportive partner, which is something very positive, because disarmament and kind of this dismantling of the military-industrial complex, like the idea that war and conflict and killing is profitable in our exploitative capitalist system, this is like a core issue of feminist foreign policy, disarmament. So Sweden doing this, that's great. Though at the same time, feminist thinkers and practitioners have strongly criticized Sweden of still being one of the top arms sellers and producers per capita in this world. And also Sweden has not signed, though there were at some point good chances, not signed the nuclear ban treaty, for example. But these are like examples that Sweden has done. So supporting female peace builders and mediators, disarmament, getting feminist civil society and their ideas into the process. And when it comes to other countries, Canada, for example, that started in 2017 with their announcement of a feminist international assistance policy, so focusing on international development policy again. Whilst they have been focusing on development policy and eradicating poverty through a focus on mitigating inequality, whilst they have been focusing on that, they have very recently started a process together with feminist civil society on writing a white paper on feminist foreign policy. So it is expected that later this year, Canada will announce a fully fledged feminist foreign policy. So these are a couple of examples. Or Mexico, for example, during this crisis now, they're doing something interesting. What we learned through these couple of past weeks, they are supporting Mexican women abroad, many of them being undocumented, and hence they worry or they're afraid of accessing health services. So they have set up a system through their embassies to support these women, for example. So feminist foreign policy really is always about focusing on the needs of the most marginalized, and through that creating a more inclusive policy approach, which will then lead to more like sustainability and sustainable peace and secure societies.
Like even though like you mentioned like the several countries, like I found on your homepage that you're saying like this intersectional feminist approach like is more implemented like on an activism level, like, and also like in academia, but to a lesser extent, so to say, like in policy practice. And I was asking myself, why is that so? And like as a second question, what has to be done more, at which level it has to be implemented? Like, is it the UN because there is like a resolution on women, peace and security already? Is it like at the ministry level? Is it like the head of the government? So at which level it has to be implemented or enhanced?
These are such excellent questions. And okay, let me try. Okay. So yes, so definitely like this intersectional understanding and intersectional policy proposals, they're way more radical and inclusive and comprehensive from civil society. But I mean, civil society, of course, can be as radical because they do not have any responsibility in their decision making as much as governments, right? So we need to acknowledge that. But and again, intersectionality is an approach and understanding, a way of analyzing policy that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, a very important feminist thinker, a woman of color. So she said, listen, we cannot only look at like men and women and gender non-conforming people, we need to see how this intersects with like religion and race and class and all these aspects. So for me as a white woman, yes, there is discrimination because of my gender, but I'm definitely better off as a white woman in one of the richest countries in the world than men in other countries in the global south. So we need to take all of this into consideration. Intersectionality for us as an organization is, for example, one of the 3 core values. And we're really making such an effort to always think these different categories, race, class, gender, and so forth, in everything that we do in our policy recommendations. You can tell from the paper, for example, that we produced just recently. But governments, like the way how they fortunately often move very slowly and do not have this institutionalized knowledge within within government, within their ministries very often. They kind of, if they are well-intentioned to implement a more feminist approach, they kind of start, as Sweden did, with like focusing strongly on women. Like though Sweden very early said intersectionality is important to them, they were actually focusing on women, and it was not per se an intersectional approach. So what needs to happen is that we need more knowledge production. Feminist civil society is the expert on that. So we need well-paid feminist thinkers from civil society producing this knowledge, and we need governments being willing to pay for that work. And this is the way how governments and international organizations can also increase their capacity in that regard. Though in international organizations like the UN, there are very brilliant people already working on these topics as well. But like when feminist civil society and international organizations, when they come together to then work with governments, and when they're well-intentioned, generally well-intentioned, I think this is where we can see most things will be possible with regards to change. But we need feminist civil society. And you mentioned the Women, Peace and Security agenda, right? That is an agenda that is based on a resolution that was adopted in 2000 by the United Nations Security Council. And this resolution is the result, it is the product of decades-long feminist advocacy work by civil society. Otherwise, this would not exist. Yes, in the end, the 15 countries in the UN Security Council, the 5 permanent ones and the 10 non-permanent ones, they had to adopt it, but it was the product of feminist civil society. But the content, the original content was a lot more radical. Like it was focused on conflict prevention, on it included disarmament and talking about the military-industrial complex and all these critical issues. But then states in the Security Council, it was watered down because it had to be adopted by some countries that have a very different practice.
As a last question, let's talk about like head of governments, because like countries that are managing like the coronavirus crisis quite well, like in comparison to other countries like New Zealand, Germany, Denmark, Iceland, and Taiwan, they all have like a female head of government. What do you think can be drawn like also for the future from their leadership style?
That indeed is a very interesting and important observation that has sparked interest from the beginning of the pandemic. And first of all, like the question always was, post like, why is that? Why are women leaders better? Are these like better people? And surprise, surprise, they're not. Like no human being is born being more aggressive or better being a leader or whatever, but socialization happens, and it happens how we respond to what a man says and what a woman says and what gender non-conforming people say. And usually in society, women and their opinions are being put down, they're being silenced. We see like huge online hatred towards vocally outspoken women out there, and female politicians and so forth. So there are so many obstacles in the career and the lives of women in general, but especially, and also those who want to succeed and gain power and impact, that those who actually make it. It's like currently we have 9% heads of states, female heads of states, and there's this online source on the Council on Foreign Relations. They're counting it, so you can Google it there. It's called the Power Index. So we have like 9%, roughly 9, 10, 11% of female heads of states. So if a woman actually makes it to the very top and gaining so much power, you can pretty much be sure that she's extremely qualified, because she had to prove herself so much more than all the men around her, who are often just like put into another career level just because they're men. So that is one reason what we can learn from them. Like Jacinda Ardern of New Zealand, for example, like she is one of the most outstanding examples, and from her I think I hope we will learn that genuine leadership means being empathetic and like well-intentioned, but still being determined and determined to like produce the best results for all people in her country. And I would call her leadership style something that an expression that was coined, I think, by Brené Brown, which says strong back, soft front, and wild heart. Like she has like such back when it comes to her, but she has like such a soft approach to what she's doing, and I hope we will see more of this kind of leadership style.
Let's hope so. Kristina, thank you very much for the interesting interview, and I hope we can speak soon, and all the best for you in Berlin.
Thank you so much, and all the best to Vienna.
Thank you. And to our viewers, thank you very much again for watching us. You can subscribe our channel. It's below at the YouTube channel. You should find it. And please also join my colleague Chloe. She's there at 4 o'clock at 24 hours in isolation. So join us later. Thank you.